Welcome to Sense of Style. I'm Stuart. 8 fragrances for introverts. Boy, this is a subjective topic. I did a little bit of research. There's a couple of videos on this out there, and I read one article, and I couldn't believe some of the suggestions. 2 of the fragrances this article suggested: Tom Ford's Black Orchid, a chocolate, vanilla, and spicy fragrance. It's very loud, very overt, and I'm thinking to myself, it's also very feminine. I'm thinking, how can that be something for introverts? And also Santal 33 by Le Labo, which is a fragrance worn most by celebrities who we all know are not introverts, are not shy. They love attention. So yeah, bear that in mind. Everyone's kind of subjective on this particular topic. I did tend to go for more introverted fragrances. I also made it such a way that there are situations. There are a bunch of different situations, like introverted for a date, introverted for a job, introverted for like cool weather, that kind of thing. And then I selected a fragrance I thought would be good for that. Anyway, let's get to it. Okay, situation number 1. Now, this is the one situation where I was counterintuitive. I'm kind of introverted, and when I started dating, it was an absolute disaster. So I do know a little bit about dating as an introvert, and I went with a more overt, strong, very sensual fragrance. My selection was Musc Ravageur. Now, it's not a typical introverted fragrance in any way, but the one thing I was doing wrong when I was dating was I wasn't acting with intent. I was going to be really nice and respectful and being too friendly, and then being surprised when I was put in the friend zone. This is not a fragrance that will signal to the girl that you want to be her friend. It's just not going to come off that way. It is a very seductive, almost animalistic fragrance that'll remind both you and her why you're there. And hopefully, you can use the fragrance to your advantage, be a little bit more overt. Yeah, so it is counterintuitive. The other fragrances will not be like that. Situation number 2 is for the office. Now, this is a muted office fragrance. This is Antonio by Antonio Banderas. I've gone through 2 bottles of this. This is all I have left, and that's because it's fantastic. It is the most underrated office fragrance. It was a Fragrance Foundation Award winner in 2007. So it's a little bit on the older side, but it is an absolute gorgeous fragrance. Antonio Banderas went to perfumery school, so he's not like a typical celeb when it comes to fragrances. This thing, if you see this anywhere at a reasonable price, grab it because it's gorgeous. Now, it's a musky, woody scent, and there is a little bit of like a fir tree feel. At times, I can even pick up like just a hint of sweetness, but it's a very, very clean, woody office scent, and it's different. That's the most important thing. It's not just like boring old vetiver. You're going to get a little bit of projection like you expect in the office, but you're not going to offend anybody, and it's going to be really nice and original to boot. Situation number 3 is cool weather for an introvert. I went with Bleu Electrique by La Nuit de l'Homme. Now, that might seem a little bit odd because this is somewhat seductive. But my point here was so many winter fragrances are like very, very strong or very, very sweet or very, very loud. And this isn't. It's spicy, so it's clearly a cool weather fragrance. There's a lot of cardamom, lavender, a little bit of ginger here. But it's not like super loud. It's respectful. It is kind of muted in terms of its strength and performance. Now, if you're a very big introvert, you want to go with the original La Nuit de l'Homme, but ideally you want some kind of projection. I think this would work really well. I mean, use your own judgment though. If you do work with a lot of women, this might not be the best choice because you might come off as looking like, Mr. Suave or whatever. You don't want to do that, but most people tend to work with a wide variety of people and not just a lot of women. And so, yeah, this one will be fine and not too loud. Situation number 4 is warm weather for introverts, and I went with this. This is Creed's Milliseme Imperiale. Now, I actually wore this fragrance. As I said, I'm kind of an introvert, on a very social outdoor summer event a couple years ago. The only problem with Milliseme Imperiale was it's a little bit too introverted in this formulation. It's been watered down a lot, and it's gorgeous. It's the DNA I'm talking about here. So what I would recommend is going with Club de Nuit Milestone by Armaf, which is a much stronger formulation. And this is terrible. We should have to say this about Creed, but it's a much stronger formulation than the Creed. But it's the style, it's the DNA that is fantastic. So it's not overwhelming, but it's sweet and interesting. It's like a fruity, salty. People talk about a salty watermelon. It's got aquatic notes. And it's a very gentle, but perfect warm weather fragrance. It's also a little bit different. It's not just citrus or aquatic. It's a salty watermelon. It's different. So I think it's fantastic DNA. And I will get Milestone by the end of this year because I really believe in this for warm weather. Situation number 5 is a party or get-together situation for an introvert. I went with this. This is Guerlain L'Homme Ideal Eau de Parfum. Now, I have the EDT, and I really like the EDT because I live in Canada. The EDT is like almond and vanilla and leather, and it's very strong and sweet and sharp, which is great for the cold. But it's so weird because this is the EDP, and normally the EDPs are a little bit stronger, but not this one. This one is a little bit more muted. The vanilla and the leather, I find, is more muted here, and the cherry note takes control, and then you've got the little bit of nuttiness, and it's better blended. It's more balanced in terms of the notes than just a lot of sweetness and a lot of leather. So yeah, I think this one would be perfect because it is still fun. It's a cherry vanilla fragrance. It's kind of fun, but it's much more balanced. It's much more muted. As much as I love the EDT, it is kind of like loud and I don't know, everything's upside down in this particular line, but yeah, I would definitely go with this. Situation number 6 is a special event like a wedding, a graduation, or when you win your Oscar. I went with Chanel Allure Homme Sport Eau Extreme, and I think this is perfect for an introvert at a special event because that is the one place where if you wore something strong, you're not just going to be, outed by a handful of people. There's going to be a lot of people that be like, what is that guy wearing? And this is very subtle, but it's also very classy. It is the perfect introvert fragrance for a special event. What I like about this is it's just good enough. It's still overpriced, but the performance is just good enough. You're going to get your 4 hours, maybe 5 on some people, or if the weather's really clear. But it's subtle too. It's a subtle tonka, a subtle mint, and a subtle mandarin. Subtle fruit, subtle herb, and subtle sweetness. Everything about it is subtle. Some people say too subtle. But I think for an introvert, I think overall, this is a great introvert fragrance because it smells great and not going to offend anybody. Next up, we've got another alternative for summer. This is Karl Lagerfeld's for him. Now, this fragrance really annoys me because it fooled me. And it fooled a lot of people. It's got a very low rating on Fragrantica. And quite frankly, I did not like it at first because it's got a lot of violet. So it's very kind of sharp and clean. The violet and the lavender work together, and it's a sharp lavender. And sometimes when you first smell it, it can feel like, yeah, it's kind of boring and like super too clean almost, right? The thing about this one is the subtlety, and that's what you want when you're an introvert. I noticed the more I wore this, and I never give up on a fragrance, the more I started to pick up the fruit and that little bit of sweetness. And when you pick that up, you're like, hey, because the thing about this one is it's inexpensive, but it comes in a really nice bottle. And a lot of Lagerfeld fragrances are not cheap. And so you're like, well, why is this one not great? But yeah, this one, once you pick up that fruit and you see what it does, I think it's apple and mandarin. And you start to notice that you pick up the sweetness, then it becomes like, hey, there's something to this. This is really quite nice. And even a little bit of powderiness too. There's some sandalwood here. So yeah, this one is a really good summer introvert fragrance. It's not going to offend anybody. Just pay attention to it so that you can enjoy and appreciate it. Finally, we have another option for cool weather. And I went with Boss the Scent Absolute. Because now the open on this one, I will say, is not super introverted. This is Maninka fruit and ginger. And in the opening, I say the first 15, 20 minutes, you get a lot of Maninka fruit, which is fruity and sweet. But then this one does some magic in the dry down. The dry down is what really makes this fragrance. As the maninka fruit dies down a bit, and as the vetiver comes up, it gets very smooth, and it feels to me very high quality. In my first video on this, after I first tried it, I compared this to a Chanel. That's how much I liked it. But the three notes that they've listed blend really nicely together over the long haul. The vetiver here is just fantastic. And it's not a vetiver fragrance, but it blends well with the ginger and the maninka fruit. And it goes from something that's very fruity early on to something mildly fruity and very classy. Anyway, yeah, there's a couple different situations from your favorite introvert, or maybe I'm not your favorite, introverted fragrance guy. Thanks for watching, guys. Take it easy.